Coca-Cola is a soft drink that started in 1886. Thank you for your suggestions. The inventor of Coca-Cola, Dr. John S. Pemberton, came to Atlanta from Columbus, Georgia in 1869. In 1885, he set up a chemical laboratory in Atlanta and went into the patent medicine business. Pemberton invented such products as the Indian Queen hair dye, gingerine, and triplex liver pills. In 1886, he concocted a mixture of sugar, water, and extracts of the coca leaf and the kola nut. He added caffeine to the resulting syrup so that it could be marketed as a headache remedy. Through his research, Pemberton arrived at the conclusion that this medication was capable of relieving indigestion and exhaustion in addition to being refreshing and exhilarating. The pharmacist and his business partners could not decide whether to market the mixture as a medicine or to extol its flavor for its own sake, so they did both. The first newspaper advertisement for Coca-Cola appeared exactly 3 weeks after the first batch of syrup was produced, and the famous trademark white Spencerian script on a red background made its debut at about the same time. Coca-Cola was not, however, immediately successful. During the product's first year in existence, Pemberton and his partners spent around $74 in advertising their unique beverage and made only $50 in sales. The combined pressures of poor business and ill health led Pemberton to sell 2/3 of his business in early 1888. By 1891, a successful druggist named Asa Candler owned the entire enterprise. It had cost him $2,300. Dr. Pemberton, who died 3 years earlier, was never to know the enormous success his invention would have in the coming century. Under Candler's leadership, which spanned a 26-year period, the Coca-Cola Company grew quickly. Between 1888 and 1907, the factory and offices of the business were moved to 8 different buildings in order to keep up with the company's growth and expansion. As head of the company, Candler was most concerned with the quality and promotion of his product. He was particularly concerned with production of the syrup, which was boiled in kettles over a furnace and stirred by hand with large wooden paddles. He improved Pemberton's formula with the help of a chemist, a pharmacist, and a prescriptionist. In 1901, responding to complaints about the presence of minute amounts of cocaine in the Coca-Cola syrup, Candler devised the means to remove all traces of the substance. By 1905, the syrup was completely free of cocaine. In 1892, the newly incorporated Coca-Cola Company began to advertise its drink. Advertising materials included signs, free sample tickets, and premiums such as ornate soda fountain urns, clocks, and stained glass lampshades, all with the words Coca-Cola engraved upon them. These early advertising strategies initiated the most extensive promotional campaign for one product in history. Salesmen traveled the entire country selling the company's syrup, and by 1895, Coca-Cola was being sold and consumed in every state in the nation. Soon it was available in some Canadian cities and in Honolulu, and plans were underway for its introduction into Mexico. By the time Asa Candler left the company in 1916, Coke had also been sold in Jamaica, Cuba, Germany, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, France, and England. An event that had an enormous impact on the future and the very nature of the company was the 1899 agreement made between Candler and the two young lawyers that allowed them to bottle and sell Coca-Cola throughout the United States. The first bottling franchise had been established. In 1916, the now universally recognized, uniquely contoured-shaped Coke bottle was invented. Also during this time, all claims for the medicinal properties of Coca-Cola were quietly dropped from its advertisements. Robert Woodruff became president of the company in 1923 at the age of 33. His father, Ernest Woodruff, along with an investor group, had purchased it from the Candler family in 1919 for $25 million, and the company went public that same year at $40 a share. Through the 1920s and 1930s, such developments as a six-pack carton of Coke, which encouraged shoppers to purchase the drink for home consumption, coin-operated vending machines in the workplace, and the cooler, designed by John Stanton, expanded the domestic market considerably. Also, by the end of 1930, as a result of the company's quality control efforts, Coca-Cola tasted exactly the same everywhere. Woodruff worked with Archie Lee of the Darcy Advertising Agency, who worked to equate Coca-Cola with the American way of life. Advertisements had, in Candler's era, been targeted at the wealthy population. In Woodruff's time, the advertising was aimed at all Americans. By early 1950, African Americans were featured in advertisements, and by the mid-1950s, there was an increase in advertising targeted at other minority groups. Advertising never reflected the problems of the world, only the good and happy life. Radio advertising began in 1927, and through the years, Coca-Cola sponsored many musical programs. During World War II, Woodruff announced that every man in uniform would be able to get a bottle of Coke for 5 cents no matter what the cost to the company. This was an extremely successful marketing maneuver and provided Coke with good publicity. In 1943, at the request of General Eisenhower, Coca-Cola plants were set up near the fighting fronts in North Africa and eventually throughout Europe in order to help increase the morale of United States soldiers. Thus, Coca-Cola was introduced to the world. Coke was available in Germany prior to the war, but its survival there during the war years was due to a man named Max Kite, who kept the company going even though there was very little Coca-Cola syrup available. Kite developed his own soft drink using ingredients available to him, and he called his beverage Fanta. The decade of the 1950s was a time of the greatest European expansion for the company. During this decade, Coca-Cola opened approximately 15 to 20 plants a year throughout the world. By the 1960s, Coca-Cola began to diversify. During that decade, they would acquire Minute Maid Corporation, maker of fruit juices and high-C fruit drinks, Dunkin' Foods Corporation, and the Belmont Springs Water Company, which produced natural spring water and processed water for commercial and home use. The following year, the company purchased Aquachem Inc., producers of desalting machines and other such equipment. In addition to its diversification program, the Coca-Cola Company also expanded its product line. Fanta became available in the United States during 1960 and was introduced by the introduction of Sprite in 1961, Tab in 1963, and Fresca in 1966, along with diet versions of each soft drink. One reason that Coca-Cola began to introduce new beverages during the 1960s was competition from Pepsi Cola. During the 1970s, Coca-Cola was introduced in Russia as well as in China. They also started technological and education programs in the third world countries in which it conducted business, introducing clean water technology and sponsoring sports programs in countries too poor to provide these benefits for themselves. Also during the 70s, the company introduced Mr. Pibb and Mellow Yellow. They also introduced a sponsorship between Coca-Cola and FIFA, and the 2-liter bottle of Coke was also introduced during this time. In 1979, the Mean Joe Green television commercial debuted. The ad is consistently voted one of the best commercials of all time. Roberto Guazzetta became chairman in 1981. He immediately shook up what had become a risk-adverse, tradition-obsessed, barely profitable company. Less than a year after becoming chairman, he made 2 controversial decisions. First, he acquired Columbia Pictures for about $750 million in 1982. Guazzetta thought that the entertainment field had good growth prospects and that it would benefit from Coca-Cola's expertise in market research. Secondly, without much consumer research, Guazzetta introduced Diet Coke to the public, risking the well-regarded trademark that, until then, had stood only for the original formula. Something had to be done about the sluggish domestic sales of Coca-Cola and the intense competition presented by Pepsi. In 1950, Coke had outsold Pepsi by more than 5-1, but by 1984, Pepsi had a 23% market share, while Coke had a 22% market share. Guazzetta's second 1982 gamble paid off handsomely when Diet Coke went on to become the most successful consumer product launch of the 1980s, and eventually the number 3 soft drink in the entire world. In 1985, Guazzetta took another chance. Based on information gathered from blind taste tests, Guazzetta decided to reformulate the 99-year-old drink in the hope of combating Pepsi's growing popularity. The change to New Coke was not enthusiastically greeted by the U.S. public. Apparently, Guazzetta did not take into account the public's emotional attachment to the name Coca-Cola and all that it stood for: stability, memories, and the idea of a golden America. Within less than a year, the company brought back the old Coke, calling it Coca-Cola Classic. New Coke was universally considered the biggest consumer product blunder of the 1980s, but it was also viewed in a longer-term perspective as a positive thing because the massive amount of free publicity that the Coke brand received from the debacle. So let's get to it now. If you were an adult, teenager, or kid like me growing up in the 1980s and 90s, then you'll remember the Cola Wars, the rivalry between Coke and Pepsi. Heck, it was even mentioned in Billy Joel's song, "We Didn't Start the Fire." It was a mutually targeted marketing campaign for the direct competition between each company's product lines, especially their flagship colas, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Beginning in the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the competition escalated until it became known as the Cola Wars. So were you Team Pepsi or Team Coke? Me? I was Team Pepsi when I was a kid, but I would switch to Team Coke as I got older. Now, I'm Team Water, and I quit the colas in 2021. And don't get me started on Dasani, Aquafina, or Arrowhead Mountain tap water. Throughout the 90s, the company acquired the Indian cola brand Thumbs Up in 1993 and Barks in 1995. In 1999, Coca-Cola purchased 50% of the shares of Inca Cola for $200 million, subsequently taking control of the overseas marketing and production for the brand. In 1993, the Coca-Cola Company made a dramatic shift in its advertising by introducing the Always Coca-Cola campaign with the initial run of 27 commercials designed to appeal to specific audiences. The ads ran around the world and included a variety of innovative technical approaches, such as computer animation. One such commercial, Northern Lights, introduced what would become one of the most popular symbols of Coca-Cola advertising, the animated polar bear. The acquisitions would continue in 2001 when it acquired the Odwalla brand of fruit juices, smoothies, and bars for $181 million. In 2007, it acquired Fuse Beverage for an estimated $250 million. In 2011, it acquired the remaining stake in Honest Tea, and 2 years later, it finalized its purchase of Zico, a coconut water company. In 2014, it acquired a 17% stake in Monster Beverage for $2.15 billion, with an option to increase it to 25% as part of a long-term strategic partnership that included marketing and distribution alliances and product line swaps. But as for the Coca-Cola brand itself, in 2005, the company added Coke Zero brand, a zero-calorie soft drink with the taste of the regular Coca-Cola. In 2022, a brand new Coke Zero Sugar will replace the Coke Zero and Coke No Sugar, an announcement that's been quietly made. In the mid-2010s, Coca-Cola introduced the Share a Coke campaign. Coca-Cola's Share a Coke campaign, which saw names like Chris, Alex, and Jess, as well as Eric, as well as monikers like BFF and Wingman emblazoned on bottles and cans, is credited for increasing the company's U.S. soft drink sales. It turned out that all it takes is to reverse a decade-long sales decline is to slap names onto soda bottles. The increase came after 11 straight years of dropping sales. The containers seem perfectly designed for social media. Nothing makes drinking a Coke special like seeing one with your name on it, and plenty took the opportunity to share photos of cans on Instagram. Some 250 names were used in the campaign. Well, I am sorry if I've left out any other vital information about Coca-Cola, and I'm sure you will let me know in the comments below. But leave a comment below if you're Team Coke or Team Pepsi. You've heard it from me. So what do you remember about this iconic beverage? Leave a comment, or if you want, leave a suggestion for a future video about your favorite soft drink. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.